the
with that,
generation where we weren't supposed to care about people's genitals or skin color. It was a non-factor, and
it
all
is
of a
a
sudden it's like,
non-factor, right?
well, yeah, and it's all now it's all thrown in our face. It's crazy. It's crazy, Tom.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're talking about that, and we're going to get to that because, again, you're a dad, and one of the cool things I like about the Shake Break, I remember I was in there at one point, and somebody asked you what your greatest accomplishment was, and you're like, my kids, dummy, like it's not even close. And I feel like this coming generation, the 20 somethings, the teenagers, they're very detached from that. They're too
Yeah,
busy taking selfies and worrying how they look to the rest of the world and their social circles, and then beyond their social circles out in social media, that they haven't even really given the thought to having a family and producing
yeah,
something of worth, like actual human relationships. And
and
skin color
that's
isn't a
why
thing.
that's why anxiety is so high. That's why people are so depressed. That's why male suicide rates are so high. They don't have any meaning. Like every organism on the planet Earth has two main functions: survive and reproduce. You have things programmed into your body that want you to do those. So if you're not actively trying to do that, you're going to be sad.
That's very true. And one of the other things that I think people lack is motivation and a goal to accomplish. Now, you talk a lot about discipline during the shake break,
Discipline
about
over
goals.
motivation.
Yeah, and let's be honest, man. You go out there this weekend and take that title. I mean, you're a Cinderella Man story. You're the Cinderella Man story. You take that title and you win the tournament. Forget about it. I mean, it's almost unprecedented, especially at your age. Couture fought around that age, but really didn't span that kind of career. He was in and out sparsely of the UFC. Personally, I think that Dan Henderson was the real Randy. No disrespect to Randy, but I mean, he was around
Yeah,
forever in wars.
Dan's one of the best, one of the greatest. Yeah, Dan should be held up pretty highly compared to everybody else. Pride belt, beat Fedor. He's the man. Honestly, he's one of my top guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to bring him up a little later for a different reason. But tell people how they can get involved in the Shake Break because I personally, you should have more subscribers. You do it on a Monday through Friday basis. You're now turning that hopefully into a podcast. You have other podcast things in the works.
Hmm.
But I mean, all these. I know you did Helwani earlier. You did Luke Thomas earlier, and you told him, hey, go to the Shake Break because honestly, guys, he answers like every question. I don't think in the future he's going to be able to do that because I
Yeah.
expect it to explode. But right now, you really do take every single question. Tell people about it.
Yeah, I'll read. I'll go through and read every single one. I want to get everybody involved as much as possible because it's not me. I'm not trying to like preach to people. Like I'm trying to share my personal experiences and things that I've been through, things that I've read, but it's mostly an open discussion. I want to hear other people's opinions and see what they think. And I had a lot of people send me links and send me interesting things to read and educate myself, get me to change my opinion about some things. So it's a two-way street. It's not just me dictating to everybody. And someday, if we start getting more followers, it's going to be a lot harder to read all of the comments. But that'll be a good thing, I think.
Yeah, but exactly, it'll be a good thing, and I think that you are on that path, especially now upping the game with the thumbnails and much more. Guys, it's tough out there on YouTube. You know how long I've been in this game. I started this channel all the way back in 2007. I had a very dormant stint. I didn't post for 7 years, but thanks for everybody who's joined. It's awesome. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm lucky that I have the numbers that I have as subscribers. They're not as active though because I started doing YouTube videos like 2010,
Hmm.
and then I stepped away because I got overwhelmed with life and family and everything. It just was hard to take care of kids and edit videos and train all at the same time.
Yeah.
So I started getting back into it, like over a little over a year ago, and kind of just finding my way, finding what people needed, and I started just to notice that there's a generation of young men that don't really know where they're going or what to do, and they don't really have masculine male figures around to guide them in any way. So I was like, I'm kind of an old dude, and I got some experience. I guess I'll just put some stuff out there, see what people think, and then you know I got kids, so part of what I'm doing is I don't want my kids to grow up in this soy world. I want them to have a merit based society to live in, I want them to have some individuality, learn how to stand up and stand up on their own and take care of themselves. And they're not going to be able to do that if everybody else is keeps going down this negative path.
And I think, one of the big negative things that you talked about was kind of how race politics and identity politics have made their way mainstream again in a very negative light. And, myself, I live with my sister and her two kids. They've been here now almost 2 years, moved up from Virginia. So they're 8 and 9 years old. And, they're half black. And one of the last things I want to do is teach them that they're different or somehow they're, going to be downtrodden in society or people are going to make things tougher for them. Hey, man, it's tough for everybody. And like you said, a merit-based society, Martin Luther King Jr. said content of someone's character, not color of someone's skin. And constantly it's in the forefront of the mainstream, the color of someone's skin. I think we've stepped so far back in that respect.
Way back. We've regressed majorly, especially in a day and age where the internet exists. And the majority of people, especially in this country, have easy access to the internet with the supercomputer that they put in their pocket. The internet, when you log into the internet, it doesn't ask you what your race is. It doesn't ask you what, it barely asks you what your age is. There's no reason why you can't accomplish anything. You can find any piece of knowledge. You can learn anything. You can achieve anything through the internet. There is no restrictions. I think the big political push should be cities over 1 million people should have free Wi-Fi citywide.
Yeah, and that's the other great thing about you, John, is that you're not right or left. And I feel like that's been lost now in any kind of political discourse. The team sports politics has been such bullshit for so long. And, for people that have followed my career from, doing, Loose Change and Fabled Enemies and then working for Alex Jones and being the first person to have a show there, to watch something like InfoWars go from, basically anti-authoritarian, going after both sides. So I got to hear about the left and the Democrats all the time. I'm blown away.
I don't want to I don't need to hear about it all day long. It's like, I can see, I tune out the nonsense. Like, they're loud enough on their own.
And exactly. And not only that, it's both sides. We've talked about on the Shake Break before Tulsi Gabbard. Very much, she has made it now, so she will be in the debates, which is excellent. There's another candidate out there that was in the 2008 debates, Mike Gravel. I'm not sure if he was in 2004. I believe it was 2008. But Mike Gravel, for those that don't know, he's the one that helped get the Pentagon Papers published. He was also big into asking questions about 9/11, anti-Iraq war, weapons of mass destruction, and has continued that work today. He's lesser known because he hasn't been a senator for some time. But to get two voices on a very crowded stage where the majority of them will never speak about it. And for those familiar,
it's a big tell to me. It's somebody who's not ever talking about war and bringing in the war machine.
Yeah,
very telling. I mean, Bernie, I supported initially way back in 2016, but he never talked about international conflicts. He never talked about the wars. He never said anything about shutting those things down. So, you pay attention to the dog that doesn't bark. That's a problem.
Well, talking about war, you would think that after everybody got up there in the Congress and the Senate and finally passed this resolution in Yemen, and then, even with the caveat that if it was a dual Israeli mission, we would still go in. I thought that kind of took the teeth out of it, but it was still there. So we couldn't just go and pick the targets for Saudi Arabia and give them the weapons and let them use our drones and have these strikes. It gets vetoed. And all right, I'm upset about it. I know that you're aware of it and you're upset about it. Where was MSNBC? Where was Fox News? Where was ABC, CBS, any of these networks? There was barely a peep about it.
They're trying to push the Mueller report down everybody's throat like it was condemning, but it wasn't. It exonerated him 100%. No collusion.
It 100% exonerated them of no collusion in the sense that they couldn't find it. Everything was very carefully worded by lawyers to say we couldn't find evidence of, or there was nothing to be found. They would find no conclusions. And then they would take the second half of it where there was supposed obstruction and make it into 180 pages of that report. And believe me, that'll be the next saga. And we don't pay attention to
No.
what's happening in Syria. We're not
Yep.
paying attention to what's happening in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia. And now I promise you, after the attacks in Easter, the fact that we were already talking about strengthening our military presence there, giving them $39 million in aid starting last summer. We had announced it the February before that. And already having extra military ships in their ports for the drills that began on Good Friday. I totally expect some kind of announcement for a strike or a partnership, especially with there's also
Sri Lanka next. Yeah.
yeah, it's just so coincidental. Our ships are there. It's I'm not calling any nonsense on that. I'm just saying that we were already poised there for to be against China. That's very open. Sri Lanka is indebted heavily to China, and they're kind of in opposition. And right now, there's a presidential election going on where the incoming party may not be as U.S. friendly. And if you look at how they maneuvered in the 80s during Iran-Contra, who came into power, and when they started getting missiles from the military-industrial complex, it was in that 87, 88 range, the Reagan-Bush era. So... Oh,
this messes. So you've got all this stuff going on behind the scenes, and you have outraged pimps just getting clicks and making money, distracting people. It almost feels like it's a CIA op, because you had people who were really kind of coming together, anti-war. People really were coming together for Obama. And then Obama got elected, and then that kind of fell apart. And you still had people who were pushing, Occupy Wall Street. People wanted something done, but then people started to be divisive around each other. And it feels like the social justice warrior thing popped up at that time. I feel like they probably got funding from the CIA to push that narrative, because then it took the eyes off of the stuff that was actually a problem, which was, dealing with Wall Street, dealing with the wars. And then nobody even mentions the spying. Like, nobody even talks about the spying on U.S. citizens anymore. The Edward Snowden thing never happened.
And not only that, John,
hiding out in Russia, but it's like it never happened.
10% of the documents were seen by the public. The other 90% of those Snowden documents never saw the light of day. And I remember feeling vindicated in 2012 after making Invisible Empire and talking about this track trace database society, because Hepting versus AT&T had already been around. There was one PBS Frontline story about it, and then back in the day when Keith Olbermann was good and he was anti-war, back in the Bush administration days, he did a story about it. And basically the story goes like this. All major telecommunication companies, including AT&T, who Hepting worked for, there were 24 others that signed onto it from various organizations, admitted there was a server room side by side, and that everything was siphoned off into the NSA in these locked server rooms. So every piece of digital communication ever going through AT&T, Verizon, Time Warner, Ma Bell, anything you can imagine, was going through NSA databases. Now, does that mean they listen to everything? No. They run it through the algorithms they have today. Promise Software, Carnivore, they've been around for decades. Barely a peep. They lost the lawsuit. They lost the appeal. The Snowden information only confirmed that on a mass level with the Five Eyes program and all of our digital communications. The outrage was very, very subtle and is no longer there. The outrage of somebody like Assange being literally carried out like a dog after being confined. Guys, I don't know if you know what it's like.
7 years he was in that embassy.
John, I can't go a day not getting out of my apartment and walking my dog without going insane. Can you imagine not being able to go outside for 7 years? I mean,
that's insanity.
Guys, just so you know, people in prison get to go in the yard. There is no yard at the embassy for Assange. So how people don't realize how crazy that is for somebody who is a publisher, who hacked nothing, for them to contrive a charge of he aided in hacking by encouraging Manning to hack the password. Didn't give him any information, didn't tell him how to hack the password. Let him hack the password, and that's what they're charging.
It should really scare everybody who's involved in journalism. But it goes to tell you that most people in the mainstream journalistic places, they're not journalists. They're PR people. They're doing PR work.
All right, so now
they're not scared because they know they're only going to speak what they're told to speak, so they're going to be safe.
So let's work that into PR and MMA journalism. Okay.
Hmm.
So,
It's the same on that micro scale. It's still the same. You think
yeah.
of the promoters as the presidents or the countries, and they're controlling these people, and they don't have to outright tell them what to do, but they know that if they don't do things the way that they're supposed to do, the way the promoter wants them done, they're going to lose access. They're not going to get to talk to the fighters. They're not going to get to go to the shows. So they step in line and they're like, okay, well, these are things that get the clicks. These are the things that the promoters want us to cover. That's what we're going to do.
Well, I would also say there are points where they could get the clicks, but they don't want to lose access. And nothing illustrates that more in MMA to me than the Conor McGregor situation. You know,
Hmm.
I put that out 2 months plus before the New York Times broke that story in the United States. And everybody, I mean, if you look at my original videos on that, they're at 50%. They're
Yeah.
completely trolled. People are saying it's Rory McIlroy or some other like rugby player, and they ignore all the evidence. And the United States journalists, they're not restricted to this. You know, I have my contacts in the MMA world. I'm sending them this stuff. There's no way that people don't know about this in the organization. So then it takes 2+ months to break in the New York Times, coincidentally, on the
Yeah.
day he announces his retirement. Yeah, right.
Retirement. Yeah.
Yeah, and what does the media run with? A softball version of what happened, making it sound like it might be a he said she said thing, and there's not a plethora of evidence to go through. And then
Hmm.
focusing on the retirement in the headlines. I mean, there was maybe 20 stories. I feel like in a different
Yeah.
era, in a different time period, when WME Entertainment, Disney, Ari Emanuel, and Dana White don't have their hands in that, there's no way to stop it. You know, Don King wasn't able to stop the media firestorm with Mike Tyson, and that was a he said, she said. This was
Yeah.
not. So, what do you think? I mean, is there anybody left in MMA journalism out there that's, you know, worth their salt, somewhat honest?
I mean, they do the best they can, but I mean, it's man, it's tough because they can very well easily lose their access, and these guys aren't probably making that much money as it is, anyways. And you know, I confronted Ariel on air once and said, you know, it's not, you know, you guys aren't really doing a good job of being an investigative journalist. He says, oh, well, I don't see myself as an investigative journalist. That sounds like a kind of like what, oxymoron? Like, aren't all journalists supposed to be investigating? Aren't you
They're
supposed
like
to
a
be finding,
pundit. They're a pundit.
finding?
Yeah, they whoever greases the wheels, they'll kind of slide that way. And personally, you know, I've been on record about this. I'll do everything I can to never let McGregor be in a cage or a ringside again. He doesn't deserve to make that money, in my opinion. You know, if he was innocent, if there was an actual trial and all this came out and it was bullshit, okay. You got to understand, in Ireland, despite the fact that they can't even name you until you're convicted, for sexual assault there, it's a 92% rate where they get off, 8% conviction. Does that sound right to you? You know, in a world where a woman can come out 30 years later and talk about a high school party where she wasn't raped or even
Yeah.
really sexually assaulted, and it has Senate hearings and people freaking out. I'm not the guy that says believe all women by any means. Believe
I
merit,
can't
like you
even believe
discussed.
that uh, there's no pickup by any like Vox or any of these other organizations either. Like, just because of the Me Too type stuff, and it seems like they're specifically targeting people.
Yeah,
They don't. It's like they really don't really care.
it's
And like,
selective.
if he's innocent, he's innocent. Like, I'm more concerned about the press not talking about this stuff.
Hmm.
It seems very fishy. Like, nobody is bringing it up, and no far left wing media source is going to talk about this and say this is problematic. Like, the press, this not getting covered is problematic. Like, it's nowhere, and it must be because there's no political gain for them to cover it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be bad when a bunch of these Me Too celebrities are pictured with him and Instagram stories with him from the past and all this stuff and shaking his hand, and none of them want to come out at this point. See, that would be a real controversy, but it's not what the media is interested in. I'm very happy that they're covering the Epstein case the way they are right now. It's gotten a lot more play. There's a Pulitzer Prize, still not as much as it could be. But when you look at something
They're
like,
kind of being forced to, though. I don't think anybody wanted to cover it, but I think partly their hate for Mike Cernovich is making them cover it because they're like they're not going to let him get the credit for covering the story.
That's
And,
you know that's part of it. I don't know whether Dershowitz thinks he's really going to get off. I've been covering
mm,
that a lot lately. His defamation case, obviously connected but separate from Epstein's and separate what's going on with Acosta.
mm,
So there's a lot there, and I'm again glad they're covering. I'm glad people like R. Kelly are kind of finally getting justice after 20 years. But at the same time, he's walking around. You know,
yeah,
Epstein's walking around. Conor McGregor's walking around, and with McGregor especially there is no controversy in the MMA media, and that's where I'm going to segue into what they're trying to make controversy with Firas Zahabi. So, you know, John, I know you've talked about all this stuff at length on the Shake Break, and that's
yeah.
what I think is really cool about you is that you've kind of been open with your warts, with your failures. Nothing pisses me off more when I'm listening to somebody and they've never taken an L in their life and they don't know what it's like to lose, or they've never done anything wrong, and it's just lie upon lie. You know, we're talking about pictograms instead of picograms, making people laugh,
Mhm.
and I just feel like that avoids it. I had listened to the Firas Zahabi audio. I think that Luke Thomas played it or something. I know you did that show, so I actually heard it. I know on one he said,
Ariel read some of the choice,
yeah,
few
some of the choice
things out.
moments. So, set the record straight, because I think that when you come at it from a humanistic point and say, hey, listen, this was a part of my life and I'm not so proud of it, people definitely relate to that. And for him to, outright say these things now about you, that you're definitely juiced up, and obviously, I think is just completely disrespectful, especially for somebody like you that has had a low point in his career and totally resurged. And now, in my opinion, he's going to shock the world on Saturday.
It wasn't even just a low point in career; it was a low point in my life. I fell into it was a downward spiral into deep depression, man. MMA kind of saved me because it was the one thing I could focus on and control in my life, and I still took a lot of losses, or not a lot of losses, but I took some losses. Lost to Maya, I lost to Berkman, and then started coming back, and then there was a lot of issues with TRT back in the day when guys were getting it legally. I found out that I'm struggling with money, I'm struggling with my family, I'm struggling to pay bills. I'm making 70% less than I was fighting in the UFC, fighting for WSOF, and having a hard time making ends meet. And I find out the guys that I fought were on legal TRT. And then I find out that not John Jones, but Victor Belfort. Victor Belfort he failed a test, and the UFC covered it up.
And
And
let's
we knew
stop
about
there.
that. We knew about that for like a year before it was made public.
Yeah, Vitor, for those that don't know, I was at UFC 103. That's one time I met Rogan, actually. He got me tickets, and I was there for his fight against Rich Franklin when he was returning. And let me tell you, TRT Vitor was something to behold, folks. I mean, that kick, that spin kick, that's what took out Bisping's eye. I mean, that was a very dangerous individual, and there's an argument to be made of getting on a level playing field, or at least that getting in your head. People don't realize, man, you're sitting there. We're going to get into AKA in a bit, and the other gyms, but you're a longtime AKA guy, return there. You're in there with the best in the world. For people that don't understand, John Fitch is grinding with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and people say, oh, he's the 155 champ. He's a huge 155er, and he's an animal that has never been beaten. So, I mean, you're grinding with the top of the line. You hear something about that, and at the time, Vitor on a tear. I can see how that gets in your head.
And you start looking at money. You start seeing other guys. You start saying, "Hey, why am I making so much less money? Because I'm sticking to my principles. Why is my family suffering? Why am I worried about whether or not I'm gonna make my mortgage payment next month? If I could just do what these guys are doing and make more money, I'd be doing great." So I succumbed. I folded, and I did it. I tried it for the Pilares fight. I was also fighting a guy who was a known cheater for steroids and for holding on to submissions too long.
We're
So,
career-ending submissions, not just like, hey, I'm choking you out and you might be
yeah.
there. We're talking about pulling arms and legs, folks. Another
Mhm.
animal. I mean, this guy, he gets you in a knee bar, he gets you in an ankle lock. Forget about it. I mean, I've seen him tap more people to ankle locks than I think anybody else. I mean, that's the deal.
But yeah, well, Aoki maybe is like one of
Hmm.
the only other guys. But like, yeah, he holds, and it's not that he just gets him; he holds on to it way too long. He cranks on it way past the point of the guy tapping or the ref stopping in. And So that puts a little fear in your head, and then I just you rationalize things. Why shouldn't I make the money? Why should I put myself at risk against this guy? And you make the bad choice, and wasn't good at I wasn't good at using that stuff. I didn't know how to use that stuff, and that's why I got caught. And that forced me down even a deeper depression because I turned my back on who I was and what I believed in, and it was just downward spiral from there. Trying to find my focus, keep focusing on training. My coach at and when I was in Vegas, One Kick Nick, he helped me through a lot of that. Just because every bad story or every crazy thing that I was going through, he had somebody or had a story that was way worse than whatever I was experiencing. And then I started climbing myself back up. I started doing the right things and finding a little bit more, reason to get things done. I won the WSOF title, and I wasn't happy. I was in very, very depressed situation because the personal life was still not good. My marriage was not good. And, it wasn't until right before the Brian Foster fight that I started turning things around. And I'll give a shout out to Jordan Peterson. Quite honestly, I started watching his lectures about maps and meaning on his YouTube channel. All of his I think Harvard lectures. I started listening to that, and it started making a lot of sense about yourself and then your future self and the paths that you have to get to your future self. Well, I had the trunk of my tree to get to my future self was cut in half when I was released from the UFC. I had to reformulate how to get to my future self because it was gone. My future self was dead because the future self that I had before was UFC champ. So like I was aimless. I was wandering around aimless. I was fighting because I liked fighting and I needed the money. I didn't know where else to go, but I had a meaningless life other than taking care of my kids. So that just made the depression worse. And then when I finally could realize that I don't need that organization to get to the places that I need to be. Like that was just one path. It wasn't the whole tree. So when I started learning that and started getting the things, I started turning things around big time.
And in that Forrester fight, there's another one where you really got past adversity, got rocked, got in there, got him out of there, subbed him, got up to a little break dance. And, it was very exciting to watch. I love that. Paul Daly, still no joke, still an upper echelon guy, another veteran of the sport, been around since the Strikeforce days, my God. And, you get past him in your first Bellator bout.
He's got like 40 wins. Like he's fought a lot.
He's fought them all, man. I remember him in his Diaz fight, Nick Diaz. Yeah. I'm diehard, and Paul Daly was always a very exciting guy to watch. The Koscheck fight, even, where Koscheck proved that wrestling was the better style, him getting up, trying to take a swipe at him. Some some legendary stuff there. And, now you really do, in my opinion, have a chance to, again, cement yourself in MMA history. You've already fought many of the legends. But, again, taking out Rory McDonald, winning this tournament, and by the way, not an easy task afterwards. You've got Gracie in there. I believe that Lima will get past MVP, but he hasn't been beat yet. And that Daly.
But yeah, MVP poses a lot of danger.
Yeah.
I think Lima is probably going to be able to solve that puzzle, but you can't put it past MVP to pull off some kind of crazy athletic finish.
Yeah, I stood next to Lima we did the Bellator back to back, so we were in the hotel. He's a pretty intimidating. Yeah, intimidating 170 pounder. That's another thing these people don't understand. When you get next to some of these fighters, guys, a guy that fights at 205 is massive. he's a massive man.
I started my career thinking I was going to fight at 205. I was walking around at like 204, 203. And then I fought Wilson Govea in Florida, and he was still only like 207, cut down to 205. So he wasn't that big, but he was huge. Like he was immense. So then I was like, oh yeah, I might need to rethink this.
All right, and now speaking of, weight classes and what you do for training, we just talked about, the steroid stuff. You went vegan for a while. I think that
was another downward spiral problem that I was having.
Yeah, let's talk about it because, the Diaz boys, they've done it, but again, they fought sporadically. I don't think Nate has fought in like 3-4 years, maybe Nick 6 or 7. It wasn't they did that throughout their whole career. I know you did it for a stint, and there are some people that live and die by it, but you really felt some negative aspects to not having that animal protein.
But yeah, no, I tried it because like it was a thing. I was like, I couldn't figure out what was it. Well, why am I not finishing guys? Why am I not getting over the top? Why am I not getting the title shots? Why are they not pushing me the right way? I wasn't thinking the business or economics of what all that stuff was behind it. So I was like looking for an edge. So I was like, oh, I read some books, and I was like, maybe it's the meat. Maybe I need to clean myself up, clean my diet up. And then the problem was I quit all the processed food and all the other garbage at the same time I quit the meat. So the positive effects I had from quitting the processed food and the garbage food made me think that the veganism was working. But after several months, my body was like, nope, hey, that's not enough. You need the meat. You got to eat the meat. So like, and during the time, I never went more than 3 weeks without at least 4 ounces of steak.
Okay, so
I
you
was like, I
needed one,
needed
huh?
it. I needed it. I was like, I'm starving. Like my body wants some meat. So like I'd have like 4 ounces of something on a Saturday.
And you've kind of
And
talked
then,
about grains being like the plebes food. Basically, the serfs
yeah.
get that, and everybody
That's
else
been
gets
the
the.
past. That's the past year and a half that I've come to that conclusion that a lot of like bread and a lot of carbs are slave food because it can be produced in mass. It can be used as a form of currency, and it can be used to give energy to your workers, give them a full belly. They think that they're having a great life because they have a full belly. They didn't have to work that hard. They had to farm, but they didn't have to go out and hunt and do whatever to get the animal. So like, it's just a theory. It could be completely wrong.
I think
But
it's
I've
funny.
cut down on the carbs a lot, and like I've noticed a major change in my body, my energy levels. Lifting weights and low carb, I think, is the way to go, especially the lifting weights. But yeah, so then I used the vegan thing for about 6 months, and then 6 to 9 months or so. I'll have to go through my journals and totally really look at it. But then I started doing the weekday vegan thing. So it was 5 days a week I was vegan, and the 2 days I ate meat normal. Um, and that was a much better feeling for me. That was like where the Eric Silva fight was. And then the first kid came, and it was too much work to do the vegan thing. It was just way too much. I had to eat all day long. Had to go to the store like every 2 days because you're buying Whole Foods, and the Whole Foods don't last as long. Whole organic foods just don't last as long. So, you know, it was just too much work with the kid, and we just went back to eating meat. And then 2016, before my World Series of Fighting title fight, I switched to a bodybuilding diet where I eat 6 times a day. Two of the meals are shakes. That's where the shake break. So like that second meal of the day is a shake. So that's where the shake break comes from. Is I was sitting down having my shake and taking my pills anyway, so I just turned on the live stream that day. But then with that way of eating, I noticed major improvements. My body looked better. I felt stronger. Uh, I enjoyed knowing what I was going to eat and when I was going to eat it. I didn't have to think about, what am I going to have today? Am I going to make a sandwich? Looking through the fridge, like it was already preset. It was already pre-made, and then it made room for cheat meals on the weekend, which is great because then you get to start looking forward to food and planning food on the weekends. I think a lot of times we're so uppity and we have life so good. We eat like kings every single day. Like every day is Thanksgiving. Every day is a banquet meal. Maybe you should just be putting fuel into the machine some days. And I think that's where I'm at now. That's where I've been over the last year. The last year, I've cut back on the carbs majorly, up the fat, and I'm much stronger. I carry more mass. I feel better. I don't have the same problems with injuries. So I think it's definitely the way to go.
And what are you walking around at right now? I'm gonna guess like 188, 190.
No, right now, because it's Monday fight week, I'm about 183.
180. Damn, man. That's not bad at all. So because you do a
No,
lot.
I get it down to striking range, with the fight. So uh, I didn't have my shake today, so I skipped that. I'll have my meal here in a second. It'll be about 4 ounces of chicken,
Mhm.
a little bit of carbs, and then some veggies if I still have some. I got to go get my hair cut and go to the Costco later.
So what are you
to my
walking like
fighting dress.
175, 178 the day before, and that's your big cut where you kind of just sweat it out and work it?
No, I'll be about anywhere from that Thursday night. I'll be anywhere from 178 to 181,
Okay.
82, and then I'll cut as much weight as I can that Thursday night. And then depending where I'm at, depends on how big the meal is I can have that night. I'll get up in the morning, cut the rest water weight, and jump on the scale Friday morning at 9 o'clock.
Awesome. Awesome. And you know what? People can find out kind of about your regiment and weight cutting and all this stuff in the very beginning, not only from your Patreon, right?
Yeah.
For like $1 a month, you give them a meal plan, but you're an author. So I want to kind of talk about that really quickly, guys. If you don't know, he's got Failing Upwards. Oh, there's the book he's holding. I was bringing it up on the Amazon because you can buy it. We'll come back to you. Death by Ego, and this is really early. I didn't realize, this is only going to be one of 4. And you were talking about how you have one that you think might even be 3 books.
Yeah, it's going to take a while to get through these. Like, I'm going to really have to sit myself down and make myself right.
Well, that's awesome, man. I mean, first of all, everybody always talks about doing a journal, and obviously you have now for a good amount of time. How does that affect
years
you?
Or more, yeah.
I mean, aside from putting it together, which I'm sure is very fulfilling when you have it in a hardcover and people are talking to you about it, but what's the journey like when you're actually going through and looking at that kid from 20? I think about myself every once in a while. For 20 years ago, I'll see an old like VHS video, where you're in a square and everything's squiggly. We don't have the cell phone goodness, and you're like, damn, or an actual photograph, not a digital one. You put it in your hand. When you see that writing, what do you think?
Man, there's a lot of embarrassment because you're like, oh, you're such an idiot. Like, you're such an idiot. What are you doing? Like, why did you do this? Like, you blew this, you blew that, you failed this. Why are you thinking this? This is such a wrong. And that's one of the reasons too. Like, I wanted to like kind of talk to younger guys in my shake breaks too, because I was like, man, I wish I would have had somebody to like wring my neck or tell me not to do this or whatever. There was things with injuries, ignoring certain injuries, ignoring like staph infection and crap. Things with girls, like, if a girl shows you who she is, believe her. I think that's one of the biggest things is like, we go make excuses. Oh no, that was just a mistake. That was just different. Bullshit. Like, there's a plethora, the abundance mindset, especially with women, I think is something that young men really need to understand. And you really understand is like your number one goal needs to be self-improvement and making yourself a magnet. You're right. You're not supposed to be searching through a haystack looking for the needle. You need to make yourself the magnet so the needles come to you. Little things like that. Little things with training. It was cool to see in the book like how the training started and how we kind of morphed it into what it is today. Because it was the Stone Age. We didn't know how to train for an MMA fight. Nobody did. Like, we were making it up as we were going along. We heard these guys did this. Somebody went and trained in another gym and brought something back. Like, oh, okay, let's try this. It took us a while to figure out the cardio, and it took me a long time to figure out the lifting. I didn't even figure out the lifting until 2013. And you mentioned like I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Fitch, and I offer technique stuff on my second tier, and I offer some lifts. My lifting regimen and my meal plan is on the first tier, and it's just more knowledge to share with people. I've lived a pretty cool and interesting life, so I might as well share it a little bit. I mean, I might as well be the one who tells my story. I might as well be the one who puts it out there.
Yeah, and again, I think that's why the Shake Break is so cool. Again, guys, you got to subscribe. Official John Fitch, Monday through Friday, 12 to 5. And one of the things you talk about on the Shake Break that we still haven't gotten to, and time's winding down, so I want to get to, the Ali Act and why it's so important. Right now, again, you have these organizations that act as monopolies with the UFC at top. Obviously, your organization, the closest competitor, but really when you look at the UFC and their global dominance, it's huge. And
there's really no competition. It's UFC's number one, and everybody else is kind of accepted that they're number two, and they're just doing what they're doing, making money, but they're not really trying to compete.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. I mean, right now the UFC is owned by WME Entertainment. Ari Emanuel, for people that don't understand, that's the guy that Jeremy Piven played on Entourage for so long. His brother is Rahm Emanuel. These guys are deeply connected in many, many places. You look at ESPN's deal, that's Disney, guys. So this is being promoted more and more as entertainment, less like a sport, which is one of your biggest complaints.
Yeah.
And so
that's one of the big problems is that it's basically the WWE's business model. They run it as a pro wrestling organization, but it's not pro wrestling. It's a real sport. Hence the fact that the state has a regulating body that oversees it. If it wasn't a sport, then that regulating body wouldn't be there. And that would be very dangerous if that happened, if we didn't have a regulating body, because you got guys getting CTE and concussions and busted bodies and drug usage. And if you don't have the commission there to oversee, man, you're going to have something even worse than pro wrestling and the problems pro wrestlers have when their careers are over.
So what do you suggest? I mean, other than obviously getting the Ali Act passed for MMA, but something like a Screen Actors Guild for MMA fighters where you pay into the system and the longer that you're there.
The idea with the Ali Act is it's a backstop. It's a legal backstop, so you can back the promoters up against it. Mm-hmm. The association, the MMAFA, the Athletic Association, would be the enforcer, because we don't want a government body to come in and be the enforcer. We can do it ourselves. Athletes can do it themselves. So if we have something legal that says, hey, you as a business cannot operate this way, then we can take litigation, we can take action against the promoters who break that rule. One of the biggest problems in the sport is the fact that the promoter controls the title and rankings. So the titles and the rankings become completely arbitrary, and they don't really mean anything, because the promoter can just give anybody a title shot they want to, because
which happens.
Happens, and they can strip a title from anybody that they want, because they want. And that happens too.
Yeah.
And you have situations where, like, well, I was released from the UFC. I was ranked number 9th. Well, as soon as I'm released, I am no longer ranked. So, like, my notoriety, my value is stripped from me. I can't get the same amount of money, even though I'm the same fighter. You know, if you're a quarterback or you play center for a basketball team, you play quarterback for a football team, and you get traded to another team, your ranking of what level of a quarterback or center you are, you keep that. And you will keep your wealth. You'll be able to keep your amount of money that you can generate from your next contract.
Yeah. And speaking to that, you know, people getting title shots, nothing screams that to me more than when Rousey fought Betch Kohea. And she was, I think, at the time, a 13-1 underdog as well. She should have been. And they had to sanction it outside of the United States because nobody would sanction that fight. She wasn't even in the top 10. And it's like, well, we're going to do this anyway. It was a huge pay-per-view win for them. And I understand it from a business model, but that doesn't make it a sport. Exactly. And the other thing to speak to the rankings and your ability and you know, the UFC saying, you know, they got rid of you because you weren't exciting. Let me just list off a few fighters that I would say don't have a striking style that were incredibly popular or incredibly popular as of now, becoming more. You look at guys like Royce Gracie. You know, he was not a striker, guys. You know, he was somebody that would literally smother someone till he could grab something and take it. GSP.
He'd get beat up until they got tired and then submit them.
That's right. All the time. When there weren't even rounds, guys. When you'd literally lay there for 20. I remember the Shamrock fight where they called it a draw, I think, after an hour? It was something ridiculous. GSP, he's not a guy with a lot of big finishes, but you know, good-looking, marketable Canadian, had a big market behind him, and they were pushing it worldwide. He became a superstar. You mentioned Aoki. You might not hear about him in the United States, but internationally, everybody knows who Shinya Aoki is. He just won the title over in ONE FC. Exciting fight for me to watch. I watched it. I loved it. Rousey's another one, never came out gunning, just had that one knockout against Kohea, again, because she was a 13-1 dog and had no business being in there. And then you look at somebody maybe with a little less notoriety, but you mentioned Dan Henderson and Jake Shields. Jake Shields and Dan Henderson's fight is legendary. Jake Shields was not ever a striker. Probably got knocked into next Sunday, about as close to unconscious as you could be in that fight. Came back and beat Dan Henderson, who would go on to fight, I think, for another 10 years. And I think Shields is still fighting. So, you know, if you're a fan, you're not only following the strikers. And it's a bullshit excuse. I know guys like me are going to be not only rooting for you, but when you get your hand raised, freaking out for you, John, because I'm super excited. I want to ask you one more question. I'm going to let you go, and hopefully it's a MMA question you'd never got. And I know everybody probably asked you your favorite fight or whoever you wanted to fight most. But what is your most memorable round in your career? Not fight, but just the round you remember the most where, for whatever reason, whether you had to grind it out or holy shit, I can't believe I did that, or I'm going to do this next. What's that round?
Man, one of the most memorable ones was Eric Silva fight, the third round. Going into the third round, you know, the crowd was screaming in Portuguese, you know, you're gonna die, whatever their chant is there. And going into the beginning of the third round, the crowd was cheering for me. Right? So I had a Rocky moment. I had a real life Rocky moment. The Brazilian crowd in Brazil, in Rio, in this guy's hometown, was cheering for me going into the third round. So that was one of the most memorable things I've ever probably experienced.
Yeah, and Eric Silva's still fighting. He was on that Bellator back-to-back weekend at the Mohegan Sun. I saw him around too. John, I want to thank you so much for doing this, man. If you guys check it out right here, you want to see this fight, it's only on DAZN. So if you don't have the streaming service, now's the time to get it. Tell them John Fitch sent you. Again, I can't recommend it enough. Check out his book. Check out the Shake Break. Go to official John Fitch right now and subscribe. Any last words, John? I'll let you close it out.
No, man. Thanks for tuning in. You can stop by the Shake Break. I'm always obliged to answer questions, talk to people. I want to learn. I want to teach. We can't get through this shit alone. We've all got problems. We need to be able to talk to people. Don't isolate yourself, and don't be afraid to take chances.
All right, folks, thanks so much for joining me. Remember, if you're not subscribed and you enjoyed this, something a little bit different, smash that subscribe button, ring that bell so you get the notifications. But most importantly, get out there and be the change you want to see in the world.